Naomi Reyes had seen storms on every ocean of Earth, and none looked as angry as the thing ahead of UES Daedalus. The Aegis Veil ran like a ring of lightning around the Milky Way, a living horizon where space went opaque. For 3 centuries, ships had met the same end here: reflection, silence, or a vanishing without wreckage. It was the kind of boundary that trains civilizations to behave. On the bridge, 300 volunteers held their breath, earth-blue uniforms beside the saffron of Oran envoys and the spiral tattoos of Kuiper nomads. Naomi opened ship-wide. "Daedalus crew," she said, "we aren't here to break the universe. We're here to ask what happens to a species that refuses to live inside a fence." Chief Engineer Tomoko Ishii tapped a diagnostic. "Relativity, not drive, is green. If we spool, Captain, we don't unspool. We thread the knot or we tear." "History is a long list of knots," Naomi answered. "Spool." The veil worked on them the way deep water works on a diver. Lights flickered, time crawled sideways, colors arrived that had no names. A floating wrench rang like a bell without vibrating. Navigator Mason kept his voice steady. 50,000 kilometers, 20, 10, drive at 92%. Up close, the veil was not a wall but a fabric, threads of blue-white energy woven with impossible symmetry. It did not merely block, it curated. Naomi thought of velvet ropes and the way a guard can smile while keeping you outside. "Initiate," she said. The ship hummed until the air trembled. Below decks, caged singularities twisted like eels. The knot drive pinched a loophole in the arithmetic of distance and shoved the Daedalus through the tiny unreason. Naomi's bones remembered every accident she had ever survived. The world went out. It came back with sound first: engine thrum, human lungs, Mason trying to find the next word. Sight returned as a scatter of new stars, angrier, colder, arranged wrong. Set in a circle like a crown around their exit point stood monoliths the size of small moons. Not rock, facets breathed, geometry sang in harmonics that made teeth ache. "Stations," the comms officer whispered. "Dozens, are they ships?" Mason asked. "Not in any sense we understand," Tomoko said. "Instruments or temples." A wash of light swept over the Daedalus. Shields flared, then quieted as the scan ignored them the way the ocean ignores a child's sand wall. There was no speaker voice. Meaning rolled into their minds like tide, an algebra of images, a grammar of pressure and taste. The message translated simply enough. "Young ones, you have crossed into the curated expanse. State purpose." Naomi stood because posture is a language. "I am Captain Naomi Reyes of the United Earth ship Daedalus. We are explorers. Judge us by choices, not fears." Silence took a shape. Light braided into a platform that existed only in perception. Naomi stood on crystal that hummed with math. Her senior staff flickered in beside her. Before them stood a being of architecture, light caught in a lattice, more cathedral than creature. "We are the curators," it said in a voice that refused to come from any one direction. "We preserve the possible from the ruin of the impatient. Your kind has been measured before. Submit to correction or be unmade." A murmur, not panic yet, but the sound that comes before it. Naomi kept her voice level. "There is a third path. Let us prove what we are without having you carve it out of us. Test us, then judge." Silence again, then trials, 3, wisdom, restraint, innovation. Pass, and your nature may remain yours. Fail, and we will sand your rough edges until the universe is safe to touch. Naomi bowed. Tradition, not surrender. "We accept." Back on the bridge, the veil stitched itself shut. Ahead, the unknown breathed. Naomi looked at the ring of monoliths and felt history bend. "Stations," she said. "Log every heartbeat. We asked what happens to a species that refuses a fence. The answer won't be given. We will have to build it." The first trial did not arrive as an enemy. It arrived as a room. One moment the crew stood at their consoles. The next they stood in a hall whose walls were mirrors inside mirrors. A Mandelbrot of reflections that hinted at other choices, different jobs, loves, wars. The curator's voice folded through the chamber like ribbon. "Wisdom. Solve the paradox of the many and the one." A sculpture bled into view, floating polyhedra linked by lines of force, each turning on an axis that moved when you looked away. Every arrangement dissolved into contradiction. Aligned to form a whole, and the parts lost what made them themselves, preserve each, and the whole shattered. Tomoko ran numbers like rosary beads. It's a distributive systems problem. Any global solution collapses local identity. Any local maximization ruins global stability. That's the trap, Naomi said. Translate a value into algebra and watch it die. Then how? Mason asked. Naomi remembered a bar in San Antonio, her father's trumpet, the way a band becomes one animal at 2 a.m. Beyond any equation, she took a breath. We stopped treating this like chess, we treat it like jazz. Jazz, the curator repeated, testing the syllable. Call and response, Naomi said. You hold your voice, but you're listening so hard to the others that your voice bends. Answers lifts, not a sum, a conversation. She reached without touching. Crew, not commands, cues, Mason, set rhythm, Tomoko, color it. Oran envoy, drone, nomad helmsman, surprise me. They stared, then began. Mason tapped 4, then 5, then a stolen 3. Tomoko whistled a harmony that did not belong to any scale. The Oran envoy intoned a line that reminded everyone, for reasons none could name, of wheat fields. The nomad traced asymmetries with his fingers that would have gotten a pilot fired in any academy. As they played, Naomi guided the polyhedra not into a rigid solution, but into a dance. Each kept its angles, its spin, its brightness, and bent a fraction, replied, changed without surrendering. After seconds, the mirrors stopped multiplying. The sculpture rang like a bell waiting 1,000,000 years to be struck. Empathy as system control, Tomoko whispered, tuned not to a state but to one another. The curator stood among them, lattice softened. You have chosen a method not reducible to proof. You have chosen to listen as a calculational step. That's the step you can't simulate, Naomi said. Wisdom doesn't cancel difference, it promises to honor it. The mirrors folded into a corridor. New light, a skeletal station wobbling in a sky that wanted to swallow it whole. Readouts flickered, mass, spin, thermal bleed. Second trial, the curator said. Restraint, a cultural arc of the Ohelin drifts in the throat of a magnetar. 10,000 sleepers, your shields can save them or you, not both. Mason swallowed. Captain, we're not a ledger, Naomi said quietly. But we are not martyrs by posture either, we are responsible. She ran numbers like old arguments at 3 a.m. Tomoko, what if we detune our shields, not lower them, widen the resonance, accept some leakage, spread coverage like a quilt instead of a wall? We lose 30% efficiency, Tomoko said, tapping. We'll overheat. Only if the heat has nowhere to go, bleed it. Naomi pointed at the spinning star. Vector exhaust as spray, use the arc as parasol. Mason, thread us across their shadow line with the magnetar's curve as lens. Oran envoy, wake their ancient field projectors with our capacitors. Nomad, fly through dirty math. You want to turn a dying star into a fan and a shield, the nomad said, grin blooming. I can do stupid if stupid is art. Restraint, Naomi told the curator, isn't refusing to act. It's refusing to treat lives as negotiable because the spreadsheet says so. We will not trade 10,000 for 300, and we will not trade 300 for 10,000. We will work. The maneuver felt like asking a hurricane to hold still long enough to light a match. Radiation struck. Heat rose. Panels screamed. The Ohelin station flared, then dimmed, then steadied as borrowed capacitors woke. The Daedalus shuddered when the magnetar's breath pushed against widened shields. Mason whispered a string of curses. And then it tipped. The wave broke. Numbers fell like fever. 10,000 life signs ticked from gray to green. The ship's temperature slid a fraction below catastrophic. The crew laughed like survivors, rude, relief-drunk, honest. The curator's lattice brightened and dimmed. We offered you a binary, and you insisted on a third way that could not be computed in advance. Naomi nodded once. A fence teaches little. A storm teaches humility and how to ask help from physics itself. 2 trials, the curator said. 1 remains. Send it, Naomi said, and for the first time she felt the being hesitate as if somewhere inside its architecture lived a bruise. They were delivered into a valley of machinery so large that distance gave up. Towers turned without moving. Gears flowed like rivers. Whole suburbs of instruments seemed to measure nothing but their own spin. The Daedalus hovered at the edge of a continent-sized loom. The final trial, the curator said. Innovation! Here stands the aimless loom. It consumes a star's energy each century and produces nothing. Thousands have tried to shut it down, thousands to explain it. You may find a purpose, or you may end it without harm. Tomoko stared until tears made prisms. It's the cleanest machine I've ever seen, and it refuses our categories. Naomi listened, not to noise, the loom had none, but to the pattern of silence between movements, the way absence fell into rhythm if you learned how. Once, she said, my grandmother taught me to weave. A pattern is the thread you place and the space you leave. This consumes too much, the curator said. Beauty is not a defense for waste when there are mouths to feed and sons to share. Beauty defends against despair, Naomi said, and despair is as dangerous as hunger. She asked for external microphones, for the ship's hull to resonate like a drum. She asked Mason to map motion into sound, Tomoko to translate torque into color on the screens, the Oran envoy to recall a winter that ended because a village sang through it. They stood on the bridge while the loom poured its useless into them, and something like grief lifted, replaced by the plain holiness of attention. This is a memorial, Naomi said. It encodes what ledgers miss and cultures keep when records burn. It teaches endurance, persist even when outputs are unbillable. The curator flickered with a color none had seen. You argue a civilization should keep an engine that produces only meaning. Meaning is a resource, Naomi said, and war has made you forget that. She did not shut the loom down. She tuned it by a hair, a minute shift that saved a comet's worth of draw each century, paid for by a hair's gain when two wheels kissed cleaner. Harmless and an act of regard, the loom brightened, the valley sighed. Innovation, the curator said slowly, as care, not conquest. Naomi smiled despite exhaustion. Care is the most radical innovation we keep reinventing. The crystal platform rose around them. The monoliths ringed the horizon again, solemn as judges but less certain than before. The curator faced her. You have passed what no young species has passed. Something like cheering failed and became a quiet Naomi preferred. Then your wall comes down, she said, hope more than demand. The curator dimmed. No, she blinked. No. You asked to be judged by your choices. We will honor that. But the Aegis veil does not guard you from yourself. It hides you from a hunger that does not resent, does not negotiate, does not tire. We call it the pattern eaters. Others called them collectors, locusts, the pure utility. They arrived before our first writing. We built the museum of a galaxy, and then we became its wardens. The room leaned. The curator showed them a map drawn in losses, constellations dimmed where matter had been repurposed into more instruments of taking. It offered minutes from a long meeting with extinction. We feared you'd add fuel to a burning house, the curator said. But your refusal of optimality and insistence on meaning are variables our enemy does not grasp. They have learned our answers. Yours are noise. Naomi felt an unadmitted joy. The worst fight imaginable might be the one she was made to love. You didn't trap children, she said softly. You hid seeds. We did not expect the seeds to knock on the greenhouse door. The bridge returned. The crew did not shout orders. They took positions the way musicians take their marks after a long break. Naomi looked at the veil knitting itself whole behind them and the vast unsorted in front and understood that the next act would not forgive sloppy metaphors or easy wins. We came to ask a question, she told her people. Here is our answer. The fence kept a wolf out and kept us from growing teeth. We intend to keep our hearts. Both will be required. Captain, Mason said, we have motion, edge of range. 12, no, 20 signatures, configuration unknown. Curator, Naomi asked. Ahead of the swarm come auditors, the being said. They sample, they model, they will decide what to send to take you apart. Naomi rolled her shoulders as if about to step into a ring. Then we'll give them a model that breaks their math. They came like bad geometry. The auditors were ships only the way a knife is a conversation with bread. Their hulls were pure function, tetrahedral clusters with jointed booms and light-eating skin. They moved in a formation so perfect the eye read arrogance. 23, Mason said. Vectoring to encircle, they'll cut angles we can't. Good, Naomi said. Let's stop giving them angles. The curator offered an elegant, hopeless overlay. Naomi flicked it away. Tomoko, overfeed forward shields, starve weapons. Mason set a course that would get your license pulled. Oran Envoy, broadcast a tone you find spiritually impolite. Nomad, give me near collisions that aren't collisions and make them look like accidents. You're asking me to dance with knives, the Nomad said, grinning. We won't form up, Naomi told the curator. We will behave. That is not the same as disorganize. The Daedalus lunged, hesitated, then juked like a tired boxer. The first auditor twitched to adjust. A second slid to counter. A third slowed to make the geometry whole and found the ship it expected to pass half a kilometer off, rolling like a coin. Tomoko starved forward batteries and overfed shields, which struck the auditor like a shove, not a wall. The enemy wobbled. Randomness, the curator said. Not random, Naomi said. Human. Around them monoliths broke symmetry, one sang off expectation, another dimmed then flared. A permission rippled through the old guardians. 4 auditors cut for Daedalus. Naomi aimed at empty space, then the fourth most dangerous target, then nothing. The Oran tone tangled with the drive's harmonics until enemy targeting saw ghosts. The Nomad threaded them past an aperture that should have sliced their hull and missed because they were 5 meters to the wrong side of reason. The first auditor died in confusion. It turned where turning had always saved it and found a ship attached to its problem, ramming at point blank. The second died of hubris in a game that forgives nothing. The third died because a rock nudged 14 minutes earlier happened to be where prediction failed. Response time degrading, the curator said. Their collective must agree on a model before a shot. You are making agreement expensive. Keep it expensive, Naomi said. Pay in style. They killed 15 and let 8 run not out of mercy but pedagogy. Let the auditors bring home a story that hurts to generalize, Naomi said. Let them tell their god the noise has teeth. The crew breathed. The curator appeared, lattice flickering with emotions it might deny later. The swarm will send accounting next. Hundreds will need friends, Naomi said, and we'll need to teach them to misbehave. The veil answered a question nobody asked. It didn't open, it thinned. Through it came ships that swore they'd never leave home. Zephyr pressure barges, needle-bright Andari skiffs, a leviathan of the crystalline assemblage. Behind them, late because democracies are slow and stubborn, came 15 Earth ships with names that remembered nurses and teachers. Admiral Jules Akoi cut through on wideband, tired and grinning. You poked a god, Rays, couldn't let you have all the fun. Naomi grinned, then let it go. No formations. They'll memorize and counter. We need a festival. A what now? Akoi said. A street parade, Naomi said. A battle of styles. Each ship fights like its home cooks, loud, proud, improvised. Coordinate only on don'ts, don't block exits, don't chase symmetry, don't repeat success the same way twice. Akoi rubbed her temple. You're asking the galaxy to jam. I'm asking the galaxy to remember it has a soul. The curator watched 2 women invent in a minute what would have taken its council a century. We will not be symmetrical, it said, as if admitting a private sin. Good, Naomi said. Let's give them a model that throws the error, variable not defined, us. Edge of range blossomed red. Mason counted ships and stopped when counting turned into a different kind of thought. The pattern eaters brought more than steel. They brought expectation, which is sharper. Naomi let fear speak, thanked it, and set it by the door. Line up, she said, meaning the opposite. Tune up. On the net, Zephyr traded pressure maps, and Dari laid side bets. The assemblage hummed. Earth ships named for civics and lullabies warmed weapons. Naomi closed her eyes long enough to remember a bar in San Antonio and her father's hand counting them in. She opened them. "All ships," she said, "be yourselves at the top of your lungs." The swarm advanced into a song. The veil held. The museum watched. On the bridge of the Daedalus, a captain raised her hands, and the noise that cannot be modeled began. There are battles that begin with horns and banners. This one began with a count-in that only a few of them could hear. Naomi raised 2 fingers. Mason nodded. Somewhere in the net, a Zephyr captain laughed the way boatmen laugh at storms. "Remember the don'ts," Naomi said on wideband. "Don't make lines. Don't repeat a trick the same way twice. Don't pretend you're alone." They did not form up. They arrived. Andari skiffs wrote calligraphy in vapor, curling contrails into loops that looked frivolous until a pursuing auditor's targeting solution slid off the curve and bit empty space. Zephyr pressure barges, fat and obstinate, used their cavitation drives to turn vacuum dust into boiling shoals the swarm's sensor skin misread as mines. The crystalline assemblage sang. Their harmonic projectors refracted beam fire into lattices that were mathematically ugly, which was the point. Daedalus whipped from quiet to reckless and back. Tomoko fed power like a bartender who knows who can hold their liquor. "Shields up, but ragged," she said. "Let them see the seams." The first volley from the auditors stitched the field where a doctrine would have put a fleet. It found nothing but feints and a single Zephyr barge that pretended to be confused, then slammed sideways so hard the shock translated into the enemy's hull and shattered a hinge they did not know could break. The second volley was smarter and still wrong. "Model gardens," the curator said, voice thin with a feeling it had never rehearsed. "They are spawning local consensus pockets, cages for guesses. Each cage tests a hypothesis about you, then shares the confirmed pattern." "Teach them the wrong lessons," Naomi said. "Mason, give them a story and betray its third act. Or an envoy, sing a scale that resolves 1 note short and never land. Nomad, try to kill us by accident in a way that isn't actually an accident." The nomad clicked his tongue as if considering flavors. "I will threaten the ship in such a way that your grandmother would scold me but forgive me." They seeded space with contraries. Sensor buoys that pulsed prime numbers and were decoys. Cargo canisters that broadcast lullabies and were bombs. A battered Andari skiff that fluttered its wings as if dying and then bit like a wolf. Everywhere, stories began and refused to end the way the auditors needed. Their cages filled with data that would be true until it mattered. 2 allied ships died anyway. An assemblage sloop fractured along a perfect plane and went to glitter. A human corvette misjudged a spiral and woke a sun in its engine room. The pilot got her people out and rode the hull into shadow until a Zephyr barge threw itself between debris and death. Naomi marked the names on the lower edge of her awareness and did not let them fall. Rescue beacons chirped under fire. "Captain," Mason said, quiet with the kind of question that has already chosen an answer. "Go," Naomi said. "We chase kills when we can afford it. We don't leave our own to become lessons about how not to love." Tomoko's hands flicked and the ship's heat map turned angry. "We can give you 40 seconds of shield bloom and then I will scream." "40's a lifetime," Naomi said. "Nomad, make gamblers regret themselves." The nomad's laugh came soft and feral. Daedalus surged into crossfire, shield raggedness blooming into a flamboyant flare that made every auditor adjust a notch. In the born seconds, rescue pods latched clean. An enemy beam that would have written a corvette's last line split instead across a crystalline cord and etched harmless helixes in vacuum. On the net, someone shouted thanks using 3 languages and a sob. The auditors began to learn. Their cages accepted variance as normal and hunted larger invariants. Cadence of burnt-a-glide, the average between extremes, the way humans sped up when they grieved. They built a meta-model of the festival. "They're getting smarter," Tomoko said. "They're not predicting, they're bounding. We live inside their corridor and they'll narrow it." Naomi snapped her fingers. "Then step outside the hall, kill the music, go quiet." "Captain," Mason said. "No comms, no broadcast, semaphores only." She dragged an old signal kit out of a locker nobody had opened since Academy, lamp codes adapted to relativistic drift, shadow slice maneuvers that used bodies as commas. Let their consensus go looking for voices and find only bodies lying to gravity. All at once, the net lost chatter. The field went strange, a church after the hymn. Ships spoke by how they leaned and where they put their weight, by ostentatious mistakes and clumsy grace. The metamodel reached for rhythm and caught silence. It reached for formation and grabbed posture. It slowed. Daedalus kissed an auditor at a tangent and slid along its facet with shields screaming, like a skater's hand on a rail. Tomoko dumped heat into a pattern she once used to dry her mother's rice faster on a humid day. The Oran envoy pointed their nose a fraction toward a memory, and a beam curved around an absence that wasn't there. An assemblage cruiser took a shot square on and rang like a struck bell. The returning wave unbraced an enemy, and a Zephyr smacked it with a world-weary shrug. 15 auditors died. Naomi let 8 run. Let them carry home that we are not anti-logic. She said, we are post-explanation. The curator's lattice softened by a barely visible degree. You have given them a narrative whose compression cost is ruinous. Good, Naomi said, and only then let herself admit her hands were shaking. They'll bring an accountant next, start preparing to argue with someone who thinks cost is immoral. In the distance, signatures gathered like weather. Admiral Akoi's voice rode in on a carrier wave with coffee and irony. Big storm inbound, Naomi. We brought umbrellas and a brass section. Then we play, Naomi said, and we play like people who intend to be heard in 1,000 years. She looked at the spot on her console where she'd written 2 names. She tapped it once. Then she tuned the band. The next song would be Harder, Part 6. Between waves, a coalition learns whether it is an accident or a people. The dead required a word. Not for them, they had no use for it, but for those who would live with the shape of their absence. The curator proposed a silence. Naomi proposed a note. Patch me to the loom, she said. You would borrow a civilian instrument during combat, the curator said, equal parts scandal and intrigue. I would borrow a metronome, Naomi said, just long enough to keep hearts in time. A narrow beam linked ship to valley. The aimless loom answered like a sleeping giant who remembered a song from childhood. Its motion translated into a low pulse they felt in rails and ribs. Names rode the pulse. The assemblage sloop the corvette, a Zephyr engineer whose last act had been to cut a pipe with her teeth when both hands were busy. The coalition answered without language, navigation lights brightening in unison and fading, a bow lowered, a vector altered like a nod, not surrender, not revenge, a promise. A meaning as morale injection, Tomoko said half to herself. The least expensive fuel with the highest specific impulse. Expensive enough, the curator said, but it said it differently than it would have an hour ago. The storm arrived punctual and humorless. Hundreds of swarm vessels bled out of bent space, their consensus tight as wire. Among them hung long spires studded with lobes. Accounting, the curator said, consensus sinks. They absorb variance, seed it with noise, and sell back normalization. They will make your festival safe to ignore. Then we have to break the ledger, Naomi said, and maybe the furniture. The plan she proposed had an ugliness she disliked. It asked for art to become shrapnel. The curator, when it understood, dimmed so far the eye wanted to add light. That monolith, Naomi said, pointing at a crown station as old as their first successful harvest. If we push it into the glass shoals and take it apart the wrong way, the fracture fog will bend light and timing long enough to make their sinks eat their own tails. That station holds our first archive of lullabies, the curator said. We taught daughters how to sleep on that memory. Naomi did not answer for a long time. I won't lie to you, she said at last. There's an ugliness in breaking a lullaby to win a battle. If we do this, we owe you the work of reweaving later, not an apology, a labor. The monolith in question spoke then, not with a voice, but with a flaring of facet that read as consent. The curator stilled. She volunteered, it said softly, and Naomi understood that a museum had just become a people. They pushed. The coalition became stevedores, tugging an ancient crown toward an old field of crystal junk. A Zephyr barge acted as shoulder. Assemblage ships sang carefully measured dissonance until stress lines performed their last duty. Under Tomoko's timing, the monolith shattered uncleanly, great panes, then panes into sands, then sands into a fog of prisms that bleeded light into wrong directions and pulled timing like taffy. Now, Naomi said, Daedalus and 3 Andari skiffs dove though the fog like kids running through sprinklers. The sinks turned to drink variants and swallowed their own reflections. Consensus hiccuped. For 4 seconds, the swarm lost agreement about which way forward was. In those seconds, 15 ships acted on instincts they trusted. A sink tore its own lobe loose while correcting a correction. Another 8, a fraction of its fleet's directive, and told them to leave. 6 obeyed, 6 resisted, 6 waited like good accountants for policy. Reweave later, the curator said, not quite to itself. Say it again so we do not forget. Reweave later, Naomi said, make it better than it was. The glass fog cleared to glitter that would take centuries to fall. On the net, Admiral Akoi was all business. We're not through, new vector, those spires in the back. See the thickened trunk, that's a coordinator. Pull that and the plow loses its blade. Tomoko squinted at data that trickled slow, like streams crossing frozen ground. We can kill it, but not with symmetry and not with distance. It's designed to punish both. Close and crooked, Naomi said. A young pilot's voice came up from the corvette squadron that had not burned. Rays, let me take the stab. Lion Toras, my ships have to scrap, but the Corps can give me one beautiful punch. I won't make it back. No, Naomi said reflexively. Then she stopped, not because she would allow it, but because the wrongness deserved words, not command. We don't write that kind of song if there's another verse available. Tomoko, give me airbags. Airbags, Tomoko repeated. Zephyr barges carry pressure bladders the size of shame, Naomi said. Assemblage lends me a corridor. Andari, I need you to paint 3 false Toras at once. Lion, you're going to hit them in live to hate me for how close I cut it. The coalition built a cradle in motion. Zephyr bladders oriented to catch and compress, crystalline harmonics tuned to bend a shock around a living spindle, Andari smoke and mirrors with mass. When the coordinator spun its shields to account for a noble suicide that would not arrive, Toras arrived instead, hull groaning, core singing, everything too hot to touch. She nicked, did not pierce, then dumped shaped force into a hard-to-aim seam. The coordinator convulsed. A checksum failed. 1,000 ships asked a question and the answer did not come back. For half a minute the swarm became a committee with no chair. Pull them, Naomi said, and the festival obliged. They did not rout. They removed. It was less beautiful and more humane. Toras surfed out on bags and light, swearing steady and weeping in equal measure. Naomi allowed herself one whoop before the next calculus arrived. Tired crews, hot cores. A curator silently grieving a station that had rocked infants not her own. We break what we must, Naomi said, and we fix what we break, or we don't deserve the tools we wield. The curator's lattice flared a hue Naomi had learned to read as vow. We will require your hands, it said. You will have them, Naomi said. All of them. The swarm grew careful. Careful is dangerous when it belongs to an enemy that learns. They fell back, not far enough to tempt a chase, just enough to force the festival to spread thin. In the gap, the swarm unfolded something between doctrine and prayer, a slow-moving structure like a city on a stalk. Meta-consensus, the curator said. A memory palace. They will write you onto its walls until you hold still. Naomi watched it bloom with a strategist's dread and an artist's curiosity. Its walls grew by remembering. Every gambit the coalition had loved for 6 glorious minutes became a fresco with a caption, "This happens, because you did it once." Then we have to do what we have not done, Naomi said. Not new tricks, new ways to decide. What does that even mean? Mason asked. It means the chooser changes, Naomi said. We've been asking captains to be composers. For the next piece, the audience plays. She opened the net to every petty officer, every engineer, every gunner, every cadet who had thought if only and swallowed the thought because doctrine tastes better than invention. You get 1 minute. she said. One ridiculous, half-made, probably illegal idea. Speak. The channel filled with chaos that would have killed a lesser mind. Andari wanted to fly upside down through a gravity wake because it felt right. A Zephyr cook proposed dumping soup into a coolant line to change refractive indices at exactly the wrong moment. An assemblage artisan suggested painting murals on hulls with condensate because algorithms with taste would slow down to admire them. A human teen in navigation offered to invert the order of command acknowledgements to desynchronize prediction windows. "They're not plans," Tomoko said, half aghast, half delighted. "They're choices choosing themselves," Naomi said, "consensus that refuses to be a noun. They implemented 5, then 12, then a protocol for picking without reassuring a model that a protocol existed. Hull murals caught sensor time, soup shifted a beam by a hair, inverted acknowledgements made delays a weapon. The memory palace spent precious cycles deciding whether to write, and the act of writing slowed its hands. "Give me the palace's back door," Naomi said. "We don't know it as one." The curator said. "It's art," Naomi said. "Everything that remembers has a back door, a place where the maker signed it, or hid a joke, or kissed the edge so the craft would know it belonged to someone. Find me love." Assemblage singers scanned for imperfection and found a corner where math went warm. The palace's foundation hummed in a key that did not serve purpose. Someone who built it had believed, for a fraction of a second, in something other than winning. "Right there," Naomi said softly. "Whisper that we remember, too." Daedalus approached backwards, presenting not threat but a collection of stories. The Loom's Pulse, a Zephyr lullaby recorded on a phone in a humid kitchen. An Andari pilot's first sketch, the breath of a human child sleeping between shifts. The palace slowed. For one inexcusable heartbeat, the palace wanted the world to be something other than a ledger. "Now," Naomi said, and Torres, cool now and angry in a way that kept her sharp, threaded a needle through the warm place and cut a seam between rooms that should not have touched. The palace's memory went recursive and ate a fragment of itself. The stalk twisted. Far away, the swarm's front line took a step it had not intended to take. "Pull," Naomi said, and the coalition did, but not to destroy. They took the palace's pen away. Ships that had been curated, paired to function, saw murals for the first time in their lives and paused, and pausing saved nobody and saved someone. The swarm fled in shapes that had grammar but no poetry. They left behind a field of broken spires and one unbroken, cut loose by accident, drifting. "We could salvage," Tomoko said. "There's technology in there we don't have a name for." "We salvage," Naomi said, "but we ask what we will become if we love it too much." The curator stood at her side, a habit now. "You turned our trials into doctrines." "No," Naomi said, "into promises. Trials are for judges, promises are for neighbors." "Say them," the curator asked, and Naomi found herself answering as if in an old temple. "We promise to listen until our voice bends without breaking. We promise to refuse the bargain that sells one life for many if there is work left to do. We promise to keep something useless and beautiful at the center, so we remember why the rest matters." The curator's lattice bent a fraction, as if nodding with a neck it did not have. "Then you are not just noise, you are song." "Don't tell the swarm," Naomi said. "They'll start a choir. After the first great fight that isn't the last, a council is either paperwork or liturgy." The coalition chose both. Admiral Akoi presided like a conductor who knew when to let the horns argue. The curator projected casualty lists as rolling constellations. As each name burned, a light on some ship in some language replied present. They did not lower the veil, they changed its job. "We cannot tear down the fence and call that freedom," Naomi said to a room that was also 1,000 rooms. "We've all seen what rushes in, but we also cannot keep a museum locked while a library burns. Turn the wall into doors. Not one gate that makes a single bottleneck and a single point of failure, a choir of small gates. Each opens with a promise and closes when the promise is cheapened." "Conditions," the curator said, tasting a word that meant ethic when written by people and key when written by machines. Covenants, Naomi said. And schools, every gate has a classroom attached. You don't just transit, you learn the story of the place you're going to and you teach something you brought. No ship crosses alone. You carry a neighbor not of your kind. That way surprise is daily, not just during wars. Admiral Akoi scratched a note and looked up. You're proposing bureaucracy as weapon. I'm proposing friction as mercy, Naomi said. We've seen what smooth does, it eats. They drafted the Covenant of Doors while engineers patched holes. The coalition wrote like people who would have to obey the words they were making. 3 promises anchored it, the ones Naomi had said like a prayer in the aftermath. The curator added a 4th in a script that looked like frost. Reweave what you break. The Zephyra added a 5th that translated roughly to feed crews well, even during revolutions. They built the first 2 gates right where the palace had tried to memorize them. The veil did not so much open as learn to bend without cracking. One door led to a refuge for ships that had not yet chosen a people. The other to a shipyard nobody would have trusted a week before, and now everyone wanted to share. Andari painted murals along the edges so algorithms with taste would slow down. Earth got the message late, and in a bundle because there was no single line wide enough for what the coalition had to say. Naomi kept her note for the end, knowing that the order of a story is half its meaning. To the people who made me, she said into a camera she pretended was a kitchen table, we are farther from home than language expected. We met curators and wolves with calculators and versions of ourselves we don't want to become. We kept a lullaby and broke a lullaby and promised to fix it better than it was. We learned that unpredictability is not a license, it's a craft. Teach your children jazz and civics in the same hour. Fund art like you fund ports. Build schools at borders. She paused, not for effect, but to find the kind of truth that survives the long night between transmissions. If the swarm comes to you, and they will if we fail or if we win too slowly, remember this, they cannot model a neighborhood that knows its own stories. Be noisy together. When she closed the channel, Mason leaned against the bulkhead like he'd been holding his breath for an hour. We won, he said, and made it a question because he was honest. We won a question, Naomi said. That's the only kind worth winning. Signals tumbled in. A Zephyra baker offering to teach bread in exchange for harmonics. An assemblage craftsperson proposing a joint memorial for the monolith that volunteered. The curator asking whether Earth lullabies prefer minor keys. A child on an Andari skiff sending a drawing of ships with faces and insisting they were friends. The swarm was not gone. Far margins pulsed with their arithmetic. Somewhere beyond maps and doors, a patient hunger revised a theory and sharpened a knife. The loom turned and turned, and its waste and its wonder continued to be a scandal to accountants and a comfort to the tired. On the bridge of the Daedalus, Naomi walked the length of the rail the way some people walk a beach. Toras slept in a med bay, as angry as a person can be while sleeping well. Tomoko rewrote a maintenance schedule as if it were a love letter. The Nomad tuned the engine by ear because the new harmonic felt like it wanted to be sharper than last week's war. The curator appeared without prelude. We found your love, it said. In the palace, it was small and inconvenient and not optimized. It changed everything. That's what love does to a room, Naomi said, and to a battle. The curator tilted its lattice. When we built the museum, we forgot to leave a door to the street. Your people brought one. Leave it propped, Naomi said. Neighbors might come by. Beyond the gates, the future glimmered like glass fog, full of wrong angles and right promises. The coalition tuned up again. The veil hummed to its new job. Somewhere in the valley, the loom adjusted a wheel by a feather width and saved a comet's worth of power. It would take a century for the books to notice. It took a moment for a tired captain to. She raised her hands. There are songs you practice and songs you learn while you're already playing. The next piece would be the second kind. She smiled, not because she was confident, but because she was ready to be surprised by the people she trusted. The noise that cannot be modeled began again, and this time they called it by its other name.